let's get to real issues here, like filibuster reform, which is being voted on right now. And by the time you watch this, we're going to have a vote done. But I want to play a few clips on filibuster reform. The first one from MSNBC. Nancy Pelosi, Bernie Sanders, Kamala Harris, and President Biden all respond to Manchin and Sinema preventing filibuster reform. Let's play this clip.
So I asked our colleagues in the Senate respectfully for what they think filibuster means, to compare that, to weigh the equities against our democracy, because nothing less is at stake than our democracy. If you really, truly want to honor Dr. King, don't dishonor him by using a congressional custom as an excuse for protecting our democracy.
Senator Bernie Sanders tweeted directly at the two moderate Democrats holding up the legislation, writing in part, quote, "Will 50 Democrats vote to override the filibuster, protect American democracy, and pass the bill? Or will Manchin and Sinema vote with the GOP and let the bill die?" The White House didn't spare the senators either. When asked about Manchin and Sinema, Vice President Harris had this to say.
As I've said before, there are 100 members of the United States Senate, and I'm not going to absolve, nor should any of us, absolve any member of the United States Senate from taking on a responsibility to follow through on the oath that they all took to support and defend the Constitution of the United States.
And in his address at the National Action Network, President Biden evoked the legacy of Dr. King.
It's no longer just about who gets to vote. It's about who gets to count the vote and whether your vote counts at all. It's about two insidious things: voter suppression and election subversion. In his time, through his courage, his conviction, and his commitment, Dr. King held a mirror up to America and forced us to answer the question, where do we stand? Whose side are we on? We're in another moment right now where the mirror is being held up to America, being held up again. The question being asked again, where do we stand?
Right. So I want to also just, because there's a series of reactions from the media that I think are really important. I kind of want to play them back to back if you guys are cool with holding and then commenting. So this is part of, I think, the growing escalation. And let's just remind folks while we're loading the next clip that the Biden administration has been having major friction with the Manchin office. Like there are people, Ron Klain hadn't talked to them in a while. Like it had, right before New Year's, it got toxic. And as much as I personally don't feel like Biden's doing enough and there's other things he could do to move them, it's not like it's some game and dance between them. There are a lot of reports about how they're not getting along. Let's play the second clip from CNN, because CNN seems to be, I'm like, what is going on? Alternate universe. Suddenly the mainstream's sometimes siding with progressives. Let's play this.
Abby, are we seeing any dissatisfied progressives or even moderates start to pull away a bit from the president, considering the legislative narrative and those polling numbers?
Well, I mean, two data points. You've got two very powerful, it seems, moderates in the Senate who are not going out of their way to make their president look good. They have done some things in the last week, whether it was Kyrsten Sinema going to the Senate floor just before Joe Biden showed up in the Senate to essentially embarrass him. So that's one data point on the moderates. I think there's a sense there that Joe Biden doesn't have any political sway over them. And when it comes to liberals, there is a dissatisfaction here. Many of these progressives held their nose and voted for Joe Biden, even though they did not believe that he was progressive enough. And now they want to see receipts. They want to see results. And there has been less progress on some of the things that they really care about. How the White House manages that dissatisfaction is going to be the most important question of this year. Okay. Midterms are for the base.
Okay, so this is extraordinary that CNN's even recognizing this, that no, like you want to go back to blaming the progressives? How about you look at the two people holding up government, right, and voting rights? But I might be wrong, but I feel like it started to move in the press once voting rights was pushed by groups, faith-based groups, communities of color, or groups in terms of organizing communities of color. Like that's when they started to realize this is not just some sort of like schemy thing, the progressives wanting everything. Am I wrong? Do you feel like this is what I don't know if it's going to move them in the end, but it's embarrassing, no? Julia, go ahead.
Well, I mean, I'm not sure they have the capacity to be embarrassed. One thing that we've been told over and over again is that a progressive like Bernie can't be an effective president because he can't work with the other side of the aisle and he can't bring people over to his opinion. Whereas someone like Biden is moderate, so he can do a good job of bringing all of the different opinions to the table and finding a good compromise. I think what we're seeing now is that the reality is there is no compromise between the interests of capital and the interests of the public. There is no compromise. There's never been a compromise. You either protect the interests of people or you protect the interests of corporate actors who want to oppress and exploit people. When two interests are in conflict, direct conflict like that, you can't represent both. So you can't represent oil companies and people who are having their land stolen by oil companies. You can't represent big pharma and represent people with children who have diabetes. Like you cannot possibly bring both of those actors to the table and come up with a compromise, because the rich and powerful actors who continually send their own people into our government, they have no interest in compromising, and they never have. So it's always been a lie that everything is about coming to the table and having this great conversation, right? It's a sort of like West Wing take on what our democracy is and how it functions. It's this idea that we all get together in a room and we have this stirring intellectual debate, and then at the end of the day, the best ideas win. That makes no sense, because the people who end up in office are the people who have the most high dollar donors and the most high dollar contributors. So at the end of the day, the issue here is that we already don't have democracy. You know, everything we're talking about now is we need to defend our democracy. We need to defend our democracy. What democracy? If we had a democracy, people like Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin wouldn't be there in the first place to hold up progress that everyone across the country, a vast majority of people, want and support. So, I mean, it's all sort of a big distraction, this idea that like, it's just the opinion of one person. It's the opinion of two people that are keeping us from progress. But it's not really their opinions. They're sent there for a reason. And it is specifically not to ever compromise and not to ever fall in line with any sort of progressive priority.
And of course, Chuck Schumer knows that. Chuck Schumer recruited Sinema to run. I mean, there were many other people, at least in Congress, when she ran in Congress, there were other viable candidates, very well-known candidates in the district. It was a very competitive race for Congress. And of course, she was chosen to run against Martha McSally. I mean, is that what it really is? Are they just, do you feel like that's the case, Napoleon, that they're just there to kind of block no matter what, and if they're not there, somebody else will?
Yeah, I do. I mean, they're hired guns. They're the people that are put in that position, and they're executing whatever they're put there to execute. But it's true what Julia said, because like the veil is off now. It's like everybody is seeing like this is not a democracy. This is a game. We've been talking about these two people for how long now? And it's like it's not. That shouldn't be the case for a proper functioning system. And the fact that we're just rehashing the same story over and over and over again, it's time for people to really expose like the system for what it is, and the malfunction of the system for what it is. So hopefully there could be some sort of pressure being made that like we don't want the country to run like this. Like this is what we're supposed to be.
This is a good point, because on The View, you know, The View is not necessarily known for its like in-depth political analysis, a lot of complaining and stuff, but they seem to be seeing stuff that they at least were not expressing to have known before. There's this clip where they're talking about the interests of the Manchin family. Let's play that clip.
So hours from now, the Senate will begin the votes on the voting rights reform bill, which hinges on challenging filibuster rules, something that Democratic Senators Sinema and Manchin still say they oppose. So some Democrats say, well, you may oppose it, but we are going to primary you behind in 2024 if they prevent this bill from passing. But Manchin seems unfazed. Take a look.
I've been primary my entire life. That would not be anything new for me. I've never run an election. I wasn't primary. This is West Virginia. It's rough and tumble. We're used to that. So bring it on.
Yes, well, it's never been quite as rough and tumble as this, because you see, when you say to poor people, and basically that's what you're doing, we don't care how you vote, you'll vote how I tell you to vote. Poor people don't like that. They don't like it. And so you might have been set before and you could do rough and tumble. Let's see how rough and tumble you actually are. How do you see this playing out?
It's fascinating that Bernie Sanders considers them Democrats, because I don't.
Yeah.
You know, but I was just saying before to you that I think that Manchin has shown some of his cards that we didn't see before. Sort of what you were just sort of saying, that we now know that he's in bed with the coal industry and the fossil fuel industry. That his daughter. This is an interesting point. His daughter was a CEO of the pharmaceutical company that was caught gouging the price of EpiPens a few years ago, and making big donations to his campaign at the same time. This is a guy who basically doesn't want the poor people in his state to have a child tax credit because he thinks they will use the money for drugs. And he doesn't want paid sick leave because it might encourage people to lie so they can go on hunting trips. Why are the West Virginians
putting up with this?
Why will they put up with this man who doesn't give a hoot about them, the environment, or the Democratic Party, or the country at this point?
Let's pause it for a second.
Answer me that question.
Let's, because they continue, and I think this is wonderful, but ultimately they're asking the question that I think we've been asking for years. But does it matter what West Virginians think? Does he really care? I mean, he could flip to Republican tomorrow and still win. I mean, turnout's incredibly low. I mean, this is one of the flaws, as Julia said. Like, our democracy is not functioning for a lot of reasons. Money and interests, he can get away with this, but also we don't have, I mean, I guess that's why some people are focusing on voting rights. It's important. I'm not saying that's not important, but turnout's so low. Incumbents win like 95% of the time, whatever it is. Julia, do you think there's any sort of anything that being primaried not, do you think he cares about being in office? Or is he
I don't think he cares about being primaried because he is used to how the system has typically worked over the last few decades, and he has a certain arrogance about his position. So the reality is, it is true that the person with more money wins in like 90% of races. So in that sense, we have to say, okay, that's not really how a functioning democracy would work. But I do think in recent years, we've seen this sort of burgeoning wave of progressives who have been able to unseat people very much against the odds. So one thing that I've been saying, to you and to others recently is that I do think a major advantage that progressive players have is the sort of arrogance of the incumbent Democrats and of the Democratic establishment. So there is this sense of like, this has always worked, so it's always going to work. If you talk to consultants, they're going to show you what happened in 2020 and 2018 and 2016. They're going to look at what happened in previous races and try to bring that forward. And the reality is, something that worked to win a race in 1996 is not going to necessarily work to win a race in 2022. So that's both a major hindrance for the Democratic Party itself and for maintaining power, but it's also an advantage for new players who want to get in the game and want to unseat people. AOC was this big, shockwave of like, oh my gosh, how could this young bartender defeat the old establishment who had a fuck ton of money, very heavily favored to win? How could this happen? The reality is, the Democrats didn't ever take that as a reality check. They never said, you know what, we got to tighten up here, because actually it doesn't really make sense for our very well-known, very prominent, very wealthy candidate to have lost to this woman. Instead, in order to preserve their own sense of self and their sense that they are doing a good job, they told themselves it was a complete fluke and it would never happen again. This is an advantage for us. It's an advantage that they're so arrogant that they can't see what's going to happen next, even though it's quite obvious that the progressives have been gaining ground and gaining ground and gaining ground for the last 4 years, and I think are going to continue doing that. What we're seeing now is a complete failure on every level of government for the moderate Dems to deliver on anything they promised us. We know that Kamala Harris said, I think that in the pandemic, people should be getting $2,000 a month. People should be getting $2,000 a month during the pandemic. That means she thinks that every working class family in America should be getting a check for $40,000. And instead, what are they getting? 4 rapid tests in the mail 6 weeks into the worst wave of the pandemic yet. The arrogance and the sense of just that they can't be touched, it completely permeates the Democratic establishment. And it's also why I think we have to be extremely worried about a Trump run in 2024. If that man is not dead in 2024, I guarantee you he's going to get reelected.
And that's fair enough. But I will say one thing that I think the centrists, do we think that the centrists, yes, okay, they have not changed their tactics, but what I find interesting about this moment, and Napoleon, like, I don't know if maybe this is just my magical thinking here, but it's interesting that you see groups that are normally aligned with the Democratic establishment turning on Manchin and Sinema, which makes me feel like it may not be a progressive that runs to the left of them. People are talking about Ruben Gallego in Arizona running to the left of Kyrsten Sinema, and full disclosure, I know him very well. I've known him since I was like 19 or something, but he's not a progressive. He supported Biden. He's been backed by AIPAC, but like people are starting to think, oh, wouldn't it be great if all the progressives are like Ruben Gallego? Like 2 minutes of Googling, please. And same thing with Manchin. It's almost like a controlled op. I mean, they've gone so far that I don't know. I mean, what do you think? Like this is it's kabuki theater, and I'm so frustrated.
I mean, but the first thought I have, is like, why is the View having a better like political like breakdown about this thing than like you'll see on MSNBC or CNN or something like that? It's like I wish they would call Manchin out just the same way that they did when it came to his daughter and everything else in Sinema. It seems like moderates are so and centrists are so confident that they have the channels to the money that they like you said, it creates some sort of arrogance with them. But my question is like eventually this has to collapse one way or the other because people are seeing through it. But when is the actual like $1 million question? Like how long could they keep this racket going? And I think that it is an opportunity for progressives to really go hard and like Nomiki, you try to promote local races and things like that and really start putting pressure because people are gonna these moderates that are smart, they're gonna start running, like you said, kind of to the left and play on that and then get into the offices and just play business as usual, which is what has been the problem lately and why Democrats are like gonna be so unpopular going forward.
Hey, if you're not already a patron, please join us on patreon.com/The Nomiki Show. This is how we fund an independent media show. We launched right before COVID, as everybody knows, and we don't do the grifty thing in terms of whatever the controversy is of the moment that pulls people in. But that also makes our show, I think, we have a great quality audience, a deep thinking audience, an audience that wants to learn how to activate and organize and thinks globally as well as locally. We have a lot of global conversations on this channel, on this show. We, of course, have the committee program, and we're going to launch another program soon, Solidarity Wednesdays. This is all doable because of our patrons, and you can join us on patreon.com/The Nomiki Show.